morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a really great show for you today. Lots of new Trump appointments to discuss in detail. Obviously, Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz were announced as potentially joining the administration if they can get Senate approval. We will get into that in just a minute. Hello, Niall.
Hello, Robby. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
We have a lot to talk about. It's back to a Trump news cycle with just an abundance of news.
How exciting.
Absolutely. A lot of excitement. So let's get started. Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, in the closing weeks of the 2024 presidential campaign, Vice President Kamala Harris had an opportunity to appear on the Joe Rogan Experience, the most popular podcast in the country. Now, ultimately, we all know how this turned out. She declined that interview. Former President Donald Trump made the most of his 3-hour conversation with Rogan. The video version racked up 38 million views on YouTube in just 3 days. Rogan ultimately endorsed Trump the night before the election. Now, it would be naive to think that Rogan, who has certainly drifted toward the right, despite his support for Senator Bernie Sanders in 2019, was ever going to endorse Harris. I don't think that's realistic. And it's probably the case that most of Rogan's viewers, who do skew younger and skew male, would be more positively inclined toward Trump than to Harris. Even so, 40 million people is a lot of viewers. If Harris could have made a positive impression among even some small subset of those Rogan fans, wasn't the interview worth doing? Moreover, the interview would have helped her counter the argument that she is stiff and impersonal, if that is, she did a good enough job. In other words, Harris had much to gain from a successful appearance. It's possible that Harris just wasn't up to the task of making conversation with Rogan for 3 hours. If she declined for that reason, then that was her choice. Indeed, Rogan himself thinks she opted not to do the interview because her team disliked the time commitment and the lack of editing. But a different, much more pernicious explanation was given just yesterday by Jennifer Palmieri, an advisor to Doug Emhoff, the vice president's husband. Now, Palmieri told the Financial Times that Kamala Harris's team ultimately turned down Rogan because of, quote, concerns at how the interview would be perceived within the Democratic Party. Quote, there was a backlash with some of our progressive staff that didn't want her to be on it, said Palmieri. Now, in fairness, that could be a convenient excuse. Maybe Harris didn't feel up to the interview and her team is scapegoating someone else, progressive staffers. But let's say it is true. If so, it's yet another revealing glimpse at how young, progressive staffers are ruining Democratic campaigns and tanking Democratic-aligned institutions in the media, entertainment, education, and elsewhere. As independent journalist Li Fong observed on X, we live in an age where left liberal leadership destroys itself out of fear of offending lower-level, ultra-privileged woke staffers. Certainly true for the demise of The Intercept and other media. Similarly, journalist Zed Jelani wrote, the news that Kamala Harris ditched Rogan because she was scared of progressive backlash just confirms my thesis that she was not ready for prime time. You can't negotiate with Putin or Kim Jong-un if you can't handle Joe Rogan and a 23-year-old staffer. This once again shows just how out of touch the perpetually aggrieved, terminally woke employees are relative to normal people, the kind of people the Harris campaign desperately wanted to win over. It's also a good reminder of exactly the kind of thing that actually makes progressives mad. Joe Rogan makes them mad because he's not a cultural progressive, even though he would probably define himself, or previously defined himself, as a progressive populist on economic and labor issues. The fact that he aligns with the left, or is at least friendly to the left, on core bread-and-butter Bernie Sanders-style issues, that's irrelevant to progressive Harris staffers because his other opinions, for instance, he probably thinks there are only 2 genders, for instance, are irredeemably backward for progressives, even though they are widely shared by a majority of ordinary people. Contrast this contempt for Rogan with Harris's embrace of Liz Cheney. No one on the Harris campaign was apparently afraid that Cheney would offend young progressives, and indeed, those people barely made a peep if they were offended. In the real world, plenty of actual progressive people, like the Arab American voters of Michigan, were in fact not terrifically excited about the prospect of Cheney serving in a Harris administration. But the so-called progressives on the campaign, Cheney is A-OK. The Democratic Party tent is big enough for the Cheneys, but it's not big enough for Joe Rogan. That is a problem for Democratic candidates.
That's interesting thoughts all around, Robby, and quite a few that I actually agree with for a start.
Lovely.
First of all, Liz Cheney, I'd be quite happy to share the dislike or the suspicion that that was a very bad campaign move. I don't think it gained Harris any voters, and I think it lost her a few or deepened the alienation of some. The other point that I do actually agree with you on, and I'm sure have plenty to disagree as the show goes on, but the propensity to not speak to audiences that don't already agree with you, it seems a weird blind spot to me. And it is surely part of the whole project of politics to reach out to people who don't share all of your views or don't perhaps share even the majority of your views to try to win them over. And the point about the arbitrariness of Rogan seemingly being deemed unacceptable by some Democratic staffers and Liz Cheney being deemed acceptable, I think is kind of telling, because it's sort of the sense that Rogan has become this cultural touchstone that divides opinion, and so you just can't go on his show. When, as you pointed out, 38 million views for the Trump interview in the first 3 days just on YouTube alone. That seems a crazy large audience to just ignore or disdain in any way.
Right, and it's just so funny what views are outside. Well, that makes that person a fringe figure who we don't want to associate with. As you said, Liz Cheney was welcomed in, and I get that Democrats should do, Republicans do this all the time, outreach to people who don't agree with them on everything, and that's okay. John Fetterman is out there making the case for Democrats in his state of Pennsylvania, and I think his views on foreign policy are probably alienating to a lot of progressives, but he's trying to bring people in different ways. You have to have enough room for some people, more based, red-leaning Democrats, more progressive Democrats elsewhere, or you're not going to just have a successful coalition. Right. And this is someone with a massive, massive platform who, again, the propensity to go, we can't offend young staffers. And maybe it's an excuse. Maybe that wasn't really what the case was. But we know that young, irate staffers have made life more difficult at a number of otherwise progressive institutions. The venting and complaining, the kind of cancel culture milieu spilling out of that campus mindset that people who don't agree with you entirely are bad people or should be silenced or should be stopped, because it's a form of almost assault on your person to have to consider some opinion you don't entirely agree with. I remember when I was writing about that on college campuses, and I was often told that this isn't a big deal because it will just stay on college campuses, and that when young people have to go get jobs in the real world, that's a losing mentality. It doesn't work. Those people were wrong. That mindset has had some effect on our institutions, on the business world. Now, I think the tide for that level of influence is receding, and if anything, the silver lining of Kamala Harris's loss for Democrats will be maybe a further receding of that. I think a takeaway is going to be that trying to please cultural, woke, young progressives is not a winning strategy. Mm-hmm. Even more so, I think they'll be talking about that, but...
Yeah, I think firstly, the fact is that those attitudes that you're referring to in academia have plainly percolated out. Those people who have joined workforces, who have begun careers and advanced careers sometimes, have brought those attitudes with them. And I think the danger is that you just then ignore a huge swathe of the country, right? And
yeah.
The whole idea that politics is about addition seems to have gotten lost in all of that mix. And sort of related, a slight tangent, but I now see a lot of progressives suggesting that they should sort of find, in a lab somewhere and manufacture their own Joe Rogan. And I don't really think that's how it works, right? He's been around a long time. He's politically unorthodox, I would say. He does clearly tend toward the right now, but he's not a dogmatic figure in any orthodox sense.
Right, and it's not a strictly politics show. He talks about lots of things other than politics. He comes out of UFC participation, commentating. He was the host of Fear Factor. Not every interview he does. And the interview's gone for hours and hours and hours. So they talk about politics and then they talk about other things. Yeah, you're exactly right. That is not a person you create in a lab.
Right.
Although I think Democrats would benefit from having a Rogan-like commentator type person take an interest in politics rather than only running political figures.
Pod Save America or whatever,
Exactly.
Which is just purely a really basically Democratic propaganda show.
Very much so. All right, lots more to talk about on Rising today. We're going to get into the Tulsi Gabbard, Matt Gaetz, and other nominations Trump made yesterday afternoon. Stay with us. Donald Trump shocked the political world yesterday by choosing Matt Gaetz to be his Attorney General. That nomination is prompting an absolute meltdown, with the establishment in both parties utterly furious that Trump would pick the controversial Florida man.
Gaetz went to law school but has never worked as a prosecutor. He also was temporarily unable to practice law in Florida after failing to pay his Florida bar membership fees. He is a staunch supporter of the president-elect and could serve as Trump's personal wrecking ball.
The nomination is generating buzz and opposition on the Hill, with some politicians suggesting he might not have the votes to get the job. Gaetz has already resigned his seat in Congress. Now, without a parting gift from House colleagues, there is a House Ethics Committee report on him involving alleged illegal drug use and also sexual misconduct.
So now social media users are taking to X to voice their frustrations about what they see as a shocking nomination. Never Trump conservative Jonah Goldberg wrote, "I cannot imagine why someone would vote to confirm Matt Gaetz for host at Red Lobster, never mind Attorney General of the United States." And John Bolton, former national security advisor under Trump, went on CNN to voice his concerns. Take a listen.
Well, I thought it was the worst cabinet-level appointment in history until they then heard about the Matt Gaetz appointment. Really, my reaction was that this is like the legend of Caligula, the Roman emperor, who wanted to nominate his horse as a Roman consul. You had to be a Roman senator at the time to be a consul, and it was intended to show how demeaned and degraded the Roman Senate had become. So now we're going to see whether the American Senate can stand up and reject two people who are totally unqualified, unfit professionally, and really lacking in the moral characteristics, the character that you need to hold these jobs. I think this vote should be 100-0 against both of them.
Some people, of course, will consider a negative endorsement from John Bolton to be a positive endorsement overall. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna also reacted to the nomination on CBS. Let's listen.
Look, people voted for Donald Trump to have lower prices and a secure border. I don't think they voted for the appointments that they're getting. I've worked as colleagues with both Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz, so I'll let the Senate make their determination. But it's a indication, including of Tom Harmon and also Stephen Miller, of just where this president's going to go. I mean, he is not moving to the center. He's going to his MAGA base. And we'll see if he's overreaching on the mandate that he had from the American people.
Gaetz is also drawing some support from perhaps unlikely places. Glenn Greenwald praised Gaetz' record on antitrust and also pointed out that Gaetz supports a pardon for Edward Snowden. And he wrote, Trump's nominees will confront the most pushback from GOP senators will be those who scare the establishment most. Gaetz, Tulsi, RFK if nominated, Pete Hegseth, others like that, Little Marco, Kristi Noem, Elise Stefanik, Huckabee, they'll all sail right through. That's a good point. Writing for Unheard, independent journalist Lee Fong says that the left should welcome Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. Here's what he wrote. But for those who have closely followed his legislative career, the Florida lawmaker represents a sharp break from the corporate-friendly orthodoxies of the modern Republican Party. Indeed, Gaetz' elevation will provide sprawling prosecutorial powers for continuing his push against special interest influence and corporate malfeasance. So I was interested to see some love for Gaetz from left-leaning people like Lee and Glenn and others. Zed Jelani as well, pointing out his record on animal rights. He's very for animal rights. And I am pleased to say that Matt Gaetz is also very much in favor of pro-marijuana legalization. Has voted routinely for rescheduling marijuana, taking it off the most dangerous kill on sight anyone who has this substance scheduling that the federal government does. And that would be something that an attorney general more sympathetic to people who grow and consume marijuana on their own property, that would be good. I actually don't really agree with the antitrust stuff that's making the left happy. But I don't know. Where do you come down on this, Niall? I'm assuming it's not going to be very positively to Matt Gaetz.
It is not going to be terribly positive to Mr. Gaetz. Look, there are some spots in his record that I do give him dues for and give him respect for. One being he united with AOC, of all people, in that attempt to stop stock dealing by members of Congress.
Yes.
And I think good for him in that regard. Whether somebody being right on one thing, or I would have no objection to the marijuana legalization thing either, makes them, excuse me, an appropriate or worthy nominee for Attorney General, I am highly more skeptical of. We know the allegations that were made in the DOJ probe. There was to be no criminal prosecution of Matt Gaetz for the suggestion that there was, alleged sex trafficking or sexual misconduct with a 17-year-old. Nevertheless, the House Ethics Committee is still looking into some of these allegations. The fact that the congressman has immediately resigned could well appear to be an attempt to kill that probe, because the Ethics Committee typically ends probes as soon as someone resigns. And I also think, more generally, Robby, with Matt Gaetz, and actually a lot of people in Trump world, there is often this idea that they are sort of the bold outsider renegades. This is a guy whose father was a career politician, was the president at one point of the Florida State Senate, and whose political career has largely been comprised, it seems to me, of trying to attract attention to himself. And, I don't think those are fit qualifications to be Attorney General.
Look, I hear you that he's a bit attention-seeking and provocative and controversial, and maybe that thus makes him not the best choice for Attorney General. I mean, I've looked in an open-minded way at the allegations against him with the sexual misconduct trafficking. I came away thoroughly unimpressed by that case. It had to do with traveling with a 17-year-old on a plane, thus technically over state lines, and that's why that came up. But it was not he was never accused of chaining somebody to a radiator or something, and it was and also he was the victim of a blackmail, an extortion attempt by a deranged individual who has a acquaintance who went missing in the Middle East and was trying to extort, I think, both Gaetz and his father into aiding in this clearly doomed effort to find this person. It all amounted to not very much. And I years ago I tweeted something along those lines about Matt Gaetz, saying, say what you will, but even if what he's being accused of is true, it still doesn't constitute sex trafficking. And I got screamed at. I rarely delete tweets. I got so much harassment, death threats for that. I deleted that tweet. I never do this. But after days of people just screaming saying I was making excuses for pedophilia and I was condoning sex trafficking, and it was really, really, I don't often or usually complain about, getting really crazy or unkind feedback on social media. It happens from time to time. That's the role we sign up for.
Sure.
There's no woe is me. But man, was the backlash to pointing that out pretty rotten.
So look. I mean, backlashes on social media can be pretty terrible. One can argue about the definition of sex trafficking and how that is used in the law and crossing state lines. Look, if he had sex with a 17-year-old, which he denies, if he had sex with a 17-year-old, adult men should not be having sex with 17-year-olds. So
sure.
I think that's pretty clear. The other point, in terms of, for example, the House Ethics Committee looking into allegations of illicit drug use, I'm fairly libertarian on drug use questions. I do wonder, though, is the old traditional argument come into play here about people allegedly or seemingly being involved in conduct that would lead them open to blackmail? There was a blackmail attempt, as you say, which was sketchy. But what about if there is actual behavior that is, sufficiently shameful to provide material for such attempts?
I don't know. He's been accused of some pretty shameful things,
sure.
And he's still
standing.
Merrily rowing his boat. Again, what if they tank this nomination and then the next person is some, drug warrior, pro-surveillance, Trump has nominated someone who wants to, for a top law enforcement position, who supports a lot of things that not other, on the drug thing, the Snowden thing, The antitrust thing, if you're into that, I'm not. But certainly on drugs, someone who is actually not a drug warrior and wants to move in decriminalization or is more open-minded on these subjects, possibly because they themselves have been is alleged to have been a participant in some drug-related activity, and again is supportive of whistleblower-type people like Edward Snowden. And I know people don't like him for a variety of reasons, and you can say, well, he's going to be bad on things relating to Trump's own alleged criminality, but let's say they tank this, Trump picks some more standard Republican who's still going to end up being soft on Trump's alleged criminality, but is going to be harsher on those issues. That's going to be a shame, honestly.
I mean,
just on policy, looking beyond the personality, which I know is hard, which I understand why in this case that's hard to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to make an affirmative case for him, but on paper there are aspects of him that I like compared to the other people likely to get this position.
Yeah, I mean, my argument against that would be, while I think it is credible to argue on policy grounds, you say, there are things about him on paper that you like, which is fine. But we're not nominating someone on paper. We're nominating the full human being. And I think there are serious, serious questions. Quite aside from these specific allegations, there's just also a question about whether I just think he's a fundamentally unserious figure who has been nominated to an extremely serious position.
Marco Rubio is a serious figure, but I totally disagree with him, and I think his agenda is bad, and I think he will be harmful for the country's foreign policy. He's he's not involved in crazy theatrical antics, but honestly, I care more about what I think they're actually going to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, but I just think Gaetz is going to do whatever Trump tells him to do, which I'm not thrilled about either.
All right, well, tell us what you think about this appointment. We've got a lot more to talk about on Rising today. Stay with us.
Kamala Harris's campaign could be as much as $20 million in the hole. And that's after spending nearly $1 billion during its 107 brief days between launching and the election. Now, there have been many celebrity appearances and performances, but other vendors have yet to be paid, according to multiple reports. Just to recap, the Harris team shelled out $20 million for concerts, $4 million for influencers, and even spent six figures to build a replica of the Call Her Daddy podcast for Harris to sit with an interview with host Alex Cooper. DNC Finance Committee member Lindy Lee isn't happy about it all, and she is speaking out. Let's watch.
Our top donors have not gotten any sort of briefing or an apology or any sort of explanation as to where our money went.
No apology?
No one has gotten anything. We haven't gotten any sort of follow-up other than her concession speech.
Have you heard of issues, vendors being paid, not paid, anything like that?
Yeah, I've gotten calls from former staffers who have not gotten paid, and they asked me for help, including people here in Pennsylvania. And this is for work done in August. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah,
so we're $20 million in debt. Someone has to pay that off.
When asked if any money raised is going toward a legal fund to pay for a recount, this was Lee's response.
Some Twitter people are saying that money is going to go towards a recount, but I think that's just Pollyanna's thinking. I don't think there's any serious effort to have a recount.
Are they just fundraising to pay the debt?
I'm not speaking with the fundraising people right now, so I can't, they're probably upset with me.
President-elect Donald Trump seized on this, taking to X, posting, quote, "I am very surprised that the Democrats who fought a hard and valiant fight in the 2020 presidential election, raising a record amount of money, didn't have lots of money left over. We have a lot of money left over, and that our biggest asset in the campaign was earned media, and that doesn't cost very much." X account Bad Hombre posted on Saturday, quote, "Former Harris Wall staffers, now unemployed, are reporting that they did not receive their last 2 weeks of pay, which was scheduled for direct deposits into their accounts yesterday." Axios's Alex Thompson posted, quote, "DNC leaders are increasingly anxious about being left with a big bill from Kamala Harris's campaign. Chair Harrison has privately expressed worry the extent of the debt is still unclear. Rising has reached out to the Harris campaign for comment, but we did not hear back." So there are a couple categories here. We're like donors who are wondering how their money was spent.
Right.
Sorry, you donated money to a campaign. That's just how, and there's a winner and a loser, and
exactly.
That's a little bit of sour grapes. Now, vendors, people who do lighting, staging, those kinds of things, they should absolutely be paid. These are working people. The Democratic Party perceives now that it has a problem with working people. This would be no different than if it was the Republican Party or Nexstar Media or any institution. Yeah. You got to pay the people who work for you.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think there are a couple of complications with this story, but the basic fact that obviously people who do a job should be paid, that is not in dispute. The reason that this story I think has sort of rampaged down the tracks a little bit, and the 20 million figure seems to be based on a tweet from a Politico reporter, where there are a lot of other sources saying, as we noted in your part of the introduction, that they don't really know what the scale of the debt is yet. There are still bills coming in, there are apparently still donations being processed, so we know that they're somewhat in debt, but we don't know if the 20 million figure is right. Could be smaller, could be larger. There's also this thing of like Oprah got paid $1 million, whereas Oprah's argument is it was her team got paid for production costs.
Right, I looked at that. That was a little bit of a telephone problem, because if you read the initial report by the Washington Examiner on that, it made very clear that was being paid to the production company, not to the celebrity herself. It was other people reacting to it who dropped that part of it.
Exactly.
I mean, I think you could still question the wisdom of that was money well spent.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, there's an entirely separate argument about the money that was being spent to showcase these big celebrity endorsements. I have always been skeptical of the power of celebrity endorsements. Maybe Taylor Swift is a slight exception to that, but it needs to be somebody absolutely of that scale who can really move people. I think there are very few celebrities.
And also, they didn't have to pay for that at all.
Exactly.
She just tweeted her support.
And there were no production costs involved at all.
Right.
It was just I think it was on Instagram, if I remember correctly.
Right.
So there's all of that. The other point I would say, and this is not to sort of exculpate the Harris campaign from mistakes it made, because I think it made lots of mistakes, but the stories that emerge after any presidential election always strike me a little bit like the stories that emerge after the Super Bowl, where the winning team are always geniuses and the coach has never made a mistake and has all these fantastic ideas, and you lose and you're an idiot and you made all these mistakes that the armchair fan would not have made. So I think there is part of that criticism. Also, let's say for the sake of argument it's 20 million. If they raised $1 billion, yes, you shouldn't overspend. $20 million to you or me is an awful lot of money. If we're talking about a $1 billion budget, it is proportionately not that massive and may be addressed in due course.
I take that point. It is interesting that, so this is according to Open Secrets, the Harris campaign raised $1 billion. The Trump campaign pulled in during that same time frame of the 3 months of her campaign, $380 million. So Harris raised way more. It's not even close. It shows you that as much as we want to get money out of politics, or the amount of money being spent in advertising for politics is just obscene. It doesn't. You can't just straight up buy votes. You can't. You can increase your exposure. You can expose your opponent to negative advertising, but you can't. It's not like the person who spends the most money wins.
Yeah, and I'm not actually sure on the Liberal side that it is even that widely known that Harris actually outspent Trump by quite a lot.
It's just an assumption. Those rich plutocrats, they give so much money to Trump, and both sides have their plutocrats, and now the Democrats have started doing a lot better with some of the wealthiest. I think on average, the wealthier people, although the very wealthiest person is Elon Musk, and he supports Donald Trump.
No, absolutely, and I was elsewhere, on our corporate cousins in News Nation making this argument, and people in the comments were like, Elon Musk gave 117 million, I think, to a super PAC, and indeed he did, and I'm not a fan of any individual giving 117 million, but even including that and including the outside spending on the Trump campaign, the Harris campaign and its allies did in fact spend more to no avail.
Yeah, and Trump has been noting this for a long time, right? He gets earned media. He doesn't have to pay for time and attention being spent on him by the media, because he's just, everything he does generates media attention. I think in that same post he made on Truth Social, probably, he kind of jokingly offered to bail the Harris campaign out of debt. What a guy! So what a sweetheart.
So before we leave that point, I'm not normally the but Trump person, but let me do a quick but Trump here.
Go for it.
In 2020. between the election day and the end of November, he raised $170 million based largely upon his, in my view, completely spurious claims of election fraud. Some of that money went to pay his campaign debt, and when he left office, the city of El Paso was still retaining attorneys to go after the Trump campaign for $500,000 that they said they were owed for a rally almost 2 years before.
No question that there is a lot of bilking of vulnerable or gullible older people on the Republican side that I see happening all the time. Mailers going out to people saying, donate now to save our MAGA agenda, and then you look really closely at what is this going to? It's going to some conservative think tank or going to Trump for totally unrelated reasons. Sometimes it's the fundraising on behalf of candidates. This was true of some fundraising for, I believe it was for Blake Masters for the Senate race,
Arizona,
in Arizona, where if you look closely, it was actually the vast majority of the money was just going to some kind of Trump thing rather than if you
And,
and there's a lot of that kind of fraudulent behavior.
I would say.
Yes, indeed. All right, still to come on the show, we will finally get into those very exciting, I say, picks for Trump cabinet appointments. Stay tuned. More Rising right after this. Well, it's official. The satire outlet The Onion has acquired conspiracy theorist Alex Jones' far-right media website and platform. Infowars was auctioned off Wednesday, along with other of Jones' assets to help pay families of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Here was Jones reacting this morning.
They said they're shutting us down, even without a court order. This morning, the Connecticut Democrats with The Onion newspaper bought us. They asked, did they outbid? They said, well, it was competitive. So they changed all the bidding rules, made it secret 2 days ago. I had a bad feeling I told you that. And just like they tried to shut us down back in late May without a court order, they're supposed to have a court order. There's going to be injunctions filed. I'm about to go live out of Harrison's American Journal studio. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to be here until they come in here and turn the lights off.
For context, teenager Adam Lanza opened fire inside Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, killing 20 first graders and 6 teachers.
In the years following the tragic shooting, Jones repeatedly alleged that the Sandy Hook massacre was a hoax. The families sued for defamation, and in 2023 he was ordered to start paying the $1.5 billion a jury awarded those families. A judge did allow the Infowars founder to liquidate his assets, and on Wednesday bidding started, auctioning off those assets.
Reactions poured in with respect to the acquisition. Left-leaning Berkeley professor Robert Reich posted, quote, "The Onion just bought Alex Jones Infowars after he was forced to sell it due to a defamation suit from Sandy Hook parents. Last month, Rudy Giuliani had to give his luxury apartment and all his valuables to poll workers he defamed. Can defamation law end right-wing lies?" Trump delegate Mike Crispy wrote, "There's no way The Onion, a publication that hasn't been relevant in 15 years, was able to afford to purchase Infowars. Who laundered them the money to do this? Attorney General Gaetz will get to the bottom of it. Good luck, libs." And Matt Shermer wrote, quote, "When The Onion takes over Infowars, you know we are finally living in the Matrix." So, Alex Jones having to sell these assets to The Onion. The Onion, a satire website that for many, many years I thought was utterly and absolutely hysterical. I think its quality decreased somewhat in the last several years, and it was bought by a group of individuals, including a former NBC journalist, Ben Collins, who I will admit that I do not like very much, whose reporting I found was characteristic of the very worst sort of panic about misinformation and disinformation and all that. But maybe he's better off as a steward of a funny website. They did do a funny election video. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
It was actually a pretty good video. And I just I loved The Onion's Onion News Network television show. Do you remember the morning show?
Yeah.
It's like our morning show.
Exactly.
The light banter between
Yes.
the guy and the girl who just kind of hate each other. And
I know, I'm showing my age now, but I can't remember the guy who was the accounts manager who spoke in a kind of hip-hop argot about all the people he was going to kill 20 years ago, which was accounts payable guy. One of our viewers, if they're my age or older, will remember who that was. Look, The Onion in its prime, which was a long prime, was fantastic. I loved it, and it was consistently high quality for a very long time. I don't have massively strong views on it acquiring Infowars. Alex Jones is somebody who I think, well, not that you're a big defender of his, but I'm a particularly scathing critic of his because I find him just an appalling individual, really. And that defamation case that he ended up getting a $1 billion plus judgment against him, I thought was quite justified. I know you have a different view on that. To my mind, he defamed people who were already suffering just immense emotional grief, and did so in a disgusting way, and I think knew that he was lying for his own gain, and I think people like that rightly face punishment in the courts by a jury of their peers. The Onion buying it and shutting it down, I mean, I've no objection to it. The guy who was alleging that, you know, The Onion had to use laundered money, I mean, I don't know what the basis for that claim is, but a Infowars-less world would not be a poorer world, in my opinion.
yeah, look, I'm not going to lose sleep over Alex Jones having to sell off things to people he said lies about. I have skepticism of defamation law overall, and I don't know, my eyebrows go up a little bit at people having to pay such eye-popping fees for wrong, bad, untrue speech, but nevertheless speech. He was not the one who killed those. Sometimes people act like what he did was worse than the actual murders that took place at that school. It's not. It's still just speech, but he did commit defamation, and he was found guilty, and that's fine and appropriate, and I don't care if The Onion buys the stuff or anyone else. Yeah.
I mean, I just think that the scale and the emotional nature of the defamation was what led to such a massive amount of an award against him. Like, if he had, I don't know, if he'd accused somebody of, you know, stealing some candy, he wasn't going to get a $1.5 billion defamation award against him. He did it because those people who had already lost children in the most horrific circumstances imaginable then had to deal with harassment, essentially, from followers of his.
We'll say that at least defamation law is a tort. You know, this is civil. This is a sort of, I've heard arguments, this is getting into like more fringe, like libertarian political legal philosophy, but at least civil law is a kind of market-derived, or it derives from tradition and what case law says about that, rather than being a top-down government dictate that you cannot say this, you will incur criminal penalties for saying this, or even in terms of like the deplatforming of people, which is not explicitly done by government, it's done by the social media platforms themselves, although sometimes it's done at the behest of government. That's all a little, this is less sketchy than that, because this is, you know, a jury of your peers deciding it, and it's not criminal, he's not going to jail for this, he's paying a somewhat market process derived consequence for having made these people's lives so miserable. So I'm, again, as I said, I'm not losing sleep over it. I mostly find Alex, although I was, you know, not the victim of some horrible things that he said, I find his impressions very funny. Have you ever seen his impression of Hillary Clinton?
I try to avoid Alex Jones.
It's very, very amusing.
I've made up my mind about Alex Jones a long time ago, and however pointed his impressions, I don't think they're going to change my view of the man. I just think he's one of the absolute worst people in American public life.
Well, you tell us, viewers, what you think. We've got a lot more to discuss on Rising today. Stay with us.
Let me be clear. UAP are real.
That was a former Pentagon official, Luis Elizondo, in his opening remarks at the House Oversight Committee and Accountability Subcommittee hearing Wednesday. The witnesses spoke about unidentified aerial phenomenon, aka UAPs. Here's more from Elizondo.
Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. I believe we are in the midst of a multi-decade secretive arms race, one funded by misallocated taxpayer dollars and hidden from our elected representatives and oversight bodies.
Frequent guest on this show and founder of the public newsletter and Substack, Michael Shellenberger, testified that Pentagon sources confirmed the existence of an unacknowledged special access program, that program known as Immaculate Constellation. Shellenberger handed Congress a 12-page report on the program, in which he claims there are high-quality images of UAPs and recorded first-hand observations. Here's what Shellenberger said. Take a look.
I think that what the American people need to know is that the U.S. military and intelligence community are sitting on a huge amount of visual and other information, still photos, video photos, other sensor information, and they have for a very long time. And it's not those fuzzy photos and videos that we've been given. There's very clear
high res,
high resolution.
How many visuals, graphics, videos, photos?
I mean, I've been told hundreds, maybe thousands.
There was a lot to the hearing. Here's a bit more. Let's watch.
Briefly, do you believe, just for the record, that the federal government, any part of the federal government, is knowingly concealing evidence about UAPs from the public?
Yes, sir.
100%.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I also want to just go down the line. I know many of you have already said this, but just for the record again, just briefly, what do you believe UAPs could be or are?
Strong evidence that they are non-human, higher intelligence.
I echo my colleague's comment, sir.
Genuinely do not know.
Don't know, but we must find out.
Joining us now to discuss is Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett, who has pushed for hearings on UAPs and more disclosure of what the government might know. Congressman, we're so happy to have you join us.
Thank y'all for having me.
It's our pleasure. What needs to happen in order for there to be disclosures or the public's ability to process what we're hearing? Because what I feel like at so many of these kinds of hearings, which I think are tremendously beneficial, but what we hear is journalists or whistleblowers describing other people who have access to information that the public still can't get at, and it becomes frustrating. Well, if there's someone who knows something, can we hear from that person and actually see the evidence that they have?
Well, it's very frustrating, and I'm glad we had the hearing yesterday just to show how pathetic the situation is. We have a government spending tens of millions of dollars on something they say doesn't exist, and then when we want to see files of these in pictures, they're heavily redacted, or they tell us they don't exist when another department tells us they do. The only thing that's going to fix this is the man that's going to the White House, Donald J. Trump. We've got to demand from him and our legislators total disclosure. We need transparency. You all are in the media. You know what that means, more so than anybody else. The government, we can't trust this government. It is so deep and so broad that no one really grasps what's going on with this whole thing. So I think if the president comes forth and says we're going to disclose it, and here it is, that will fix it.
And to that point, Congressman, can I just clarify exactly your position on this? Do you think there is evidence there? Well, let me rephrase that. Do you know there's evidence there that is being concealed, or is your request simply for more transparency and you are agnostic as to what will be shown if there is greater transparency?
I'm 100% convinced that there's stuff being concealed. I've seen things that they won't let out. I've talked to people in the know, and they feel retribution, and that's why I filed a bill on whistleblowers on this very same subject. And I hope our Congress and the Senate have the guts to pass the dadgum thing, because that's what we're going to need, but we're also going to need a president that will trust the American public to discern for themselves.
The lack of transparency from the federal government is so automatic that I fully believe they would, redact and keep secret things that are totally benign and don't need to be secret at all. And then additionally, will keep secrets for COVID origins and Kennedy files and all that other stuff, that despite clear mandates from Congress, often in bipartisan fashion to disclose what is known, you know, on COVID origins, right? You all passed that bill. President Biden signed it, and all he got was a press release summarizing things we already know. It is so frustrating. Do you have the faith that Donald Trump, during his second term, can start to change this?
I do, because of the people that he's chosen to surround himself with on this go around, and from my discussions with him, I feel like he will be the president of disclosure. You know, I have this group in the UFO community and out in the public, you open records folks, praising the Senate's version, Chuck Schumer's 60-page version. And yesterday, even one of the members was praising it, you know, how it mimicked the Kennedy files, the dissemination of information there. And here we are 60 years, more than 60 years after Kennedy was assassinated, and we know very little more than we knew when it happened, and all the people are dead that are involved with it. That guy, we got to get this stuff out, and we've got to get it to the people, because I do not trust this government. It is too broad and too deep.
Can you just give us any more detail or texture, Congressman, as to your discussions with President-elect Trump on this particular matter? What's his stance on it? What does he say to you when you have had those conversations with him?
I think it's an open book with him. He has clearly been left out on information because of the people that were around him before were old, were just old neocons that hang around and always end up hired in government, and they protect that information. It's about power. It's about greed. It's about corruption and all those things that run this town we call Washington, D.C. And I think Trump's had enough of it. He knows this time he's not just going to have to take the head people out. He's got to go much deeper than that. And I think when he does that, you will see a lot of this information shake loose, and a lot of people will come forward because they're not afraid of retribution at that point.
And you think it really is retribution that keeps people from going forward? Because we heard from those witnesses at that hearing yesterday, and they all said, or most of them said, that they do think the UAP information or what they've seen points to non-Earth, alien, presumably, constructions, rather than just what I think is at least somewhat more plausible being military technology from another government. They said they actually think it's originating off of Earth. You know, if somebody had evidence of that, right, I have a hard time believing that would be the biggest news story in human history, and you're afraid of losing your job. Is it more than just fear of losing your job? Do they threaten people's families? Do they kidnap people? It's just such an amazing thing to be able to prove, and to be afraid of the reputational harm. I always wonder what is really going on that stops people.
We had a suspected whistleblower die mysteriously, and over the last year, David Grush was a very weak job of doing it, but they, claimed he had mental issues from combat exposure, which to me is pretty common. I'm not sure why they thought that would bring him to his knees, and that was immediately put out after his testimony to discredit him. So I think there is a lot. And you talk to pilots, they won't come forward. I've talked to pilots in confidential settings where they've said, we don't come forward, Tim, because we will be pulled off the flight line. We'll have a psych evaluation, and the debriefing will be more of an interrogation by some men in suits. I call them spooks. They're usually CIA or some other group, NSA or some other group, but that's generally what happens to these people. Airline pilots will tell you that have seen things. They come out years later because they didn't want to announce it then, because again, they possibly lose their job or other things. So yeah, the threat is real. And again, it's not going to end until Trump ends it.
Well, we hope the ground is shifting there so that we can get disclosures about this very, very important subject. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank y'all for having me.
President-elect Trump did what he does best, creating a whirlwind during his visit to D.C. He announced more big appointments and blew up several norms along the way. Aside from Matt Gaetz, the other nominee that has political tongues wagging is former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who Trump picked to be the next Director of National Intelligence. For context, the DNI was created after 9/11 to fix the lack of coordination among different branches of the government that dealt with intel.
Republicans are extremely happy about the pick. Former UFC fighter Gina Carano took to X posting, quote, "This is beyond amazing. Congratulations to this incredible woman, a true, strong leader with an incredible heart for the people. Tulsi Gabbard for the win. Well done, Donald Trump. Thank you." And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. also praised this choice, writing, quote, "The perfect place for a courageous warrior of democracy and freedom. Congratulations, Tulsi Gabbard." Of course, critics weighed in as well. Joe Walsh wrote, "When you voted for Trump, you voted to put Tulsi Gabbard, a Russian asset, in charge of our nation's intelligence. That's what you voted for. Congratulations." And senior fellow at Media Matters for America, Matt Gaetz, who's often confused for Matt Gaetz, even though they're totally different people, said, "Matt Gaetz' pick is so crazy, people have forgotten the Tulsi Gabbard pick, which was so crazy, people have forgotten about the Pete Hegseth pick. Who knows what tomorrow will bring?" More tears from Matt Gaetz is what tomorrow will bring. Tulsi Gabbard. This is someone who started her political career as a very progressive Democrat, a supporter of Bernie Sanders, ran for president as a Democrat on a economically populist platform and a non-interventionist or non-regime change kind of foreign policy, clashed significantly with Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on the debate stage, was perceived as having, I think, scored points on Kamala in a debate, has become subsequently disenchanted with the Democratic Party, formally left them, formally joined the Republican Party, has been in Trump's orbit now on the campaign, is also close with RFK Jr., and is now going to be the Director of National Intelligence.
Yes, and cue the outrage from many, many quarters, as well as the praise for some quarters that you've just noted there. So, look, I mean, a lot of the attention that Tulsi Gabbard gets is for her views on foreign policy, war, American interventionism, and all of that. And while I think that some of that criticism is unfair, I think some of it is also valid. So to take just briefly an unfair thing, there was a column written in the Washington Examiner, and it said something to the effect that Xi Jinping would be delighted if Tulsi Gabbard were confirmed. Now, the evidence or the supporting case for that was that Tulsi Gabbard didn't want there to be a trade war with China. That is a very mainstream belief, and if we're accusing anybody who believes that of being a sort of Chinese fellow traveler, that would be like
100%.
A massive number of people. Where I think it gets more questionable with Gabbard is in relation to Russia, and especially even more so in relation to Syria, where she does have this very peculiar record of almost de facto pro-Bashar Assad positions or arguments in Syria, basically saying the US should stay out of it, it's up to the Syrian people, saying that, or portraying everyone who is against Assad as a kind of Islamist or Al-Qaeda or ISIS, which is just factually wrong and seems like at one point she said, for example, that Putin, because of his backing for Assad, was willing to bomb Al-Qaeda in a way that Americans were not. So, like, that's not a non-interventionist position. That's a pro-Russian intervention, anti-American intervention position, which is, I think, rightly suspicion arousing.
Well, but I don't think it makes her a Russian asset. I mean, I think there's no way she's actually a Russian asset, and that kind of commentary is disturbing. I am under no illusions about Bashar al-Assad as being a butcher, a horrific dictator who has gassed his own people. I absolutely believe what he has done to his own people is bad and wrong. At the same time, I do not think the U.S. should intervene. I think we have learned this lesson enough times from Iraq, from Libya, that we take out the bad guys, we end up with worse guys. It doesn't improve the situation in the Middle East. And it is, I mean, I would agree with her that it's ultimately the Syrian people's problem. I do not think we should get involved. That's not to make, and sometimes, I agree with you that sometimes people speaking out against intervention, they're speaking out against intervention, and then there's having undue sympathy or minimizing of the bad behavior of the Putin or the Assad or the Xi Jinping, which I never want to do because those people are authoritarians in different ways, engaged in murder or political subterfuge, bad. And I really dislike the trend in some non-interventionists to say everything the U.S. does is bad, everyone else is good. That's
anti-Americanism, basically.
Yeah,
right?
it's very silly.
Yeah.
What is good is to acknowledge the faults and flaws of America's approach, its foreign policy, and the flaws of other countries. But I do, at the end of the day, I would rather have a director of national intelligence who is skeptical about increased involvement in this part of the world and the China trade war stuff.
So the thing that I have some difficulty discussing Gabbard, because I think some of her points are valid points for discussion. It's that when you look at the whole, it seems to look just a little bit more suspect in terms of the consistent attempt to give a generous interpretation to Putin's actions. So, for example, in relation to Ukraine, she has talked about the fact that there is a real problem, or one of the reasons for that war is NATO expansionism, essentially, and not ruling out Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. That is not untrue. I think that is a part of the picture there. The problem is that she does not seem to so much acknowledge the fact that Vladimir Putin's belief that Ukraine isn't really a proper country and should be part of Russia is also a major part of that picture. And she tends, I think, to really be enormously generous in her interpretation of Russian actions while being in some ways justifiably critical of American actions.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what she's said about the conflict. To the extent that she wants to bring it to an end, I agree with that. I think the U.S. should try to play a peacemaker role here. And I think even if that results in Ukraine losing some territory, it is worth doing that. I think the idea that they're going to hold on to the entire country is not realistic. And to prevent the fall of the entire country, there's going to need some cessation of the parts of of Ukraine that are Russian-speaking and culturally Russian-affiliated, and are, I mean, in an ideal world, they would vote on whether to be part of Ukraine or part of Russia or part of their own country, and that would be good. I don't think the endless supply of weapons and money and support to Ukraine is, I think, just naive, given their likelihood of expelling Russia. They may put up a good resistance, but a lot of people are dying. Their forces are diminished. They've had to do conscriptions of people outside the normal military age. Long term, we need, before the entire country collapses, we need to move toward ending it. But I do agree with you, and I don't know if this is, maybe it's true of Tulsi. I don't know whether it's true of her in particular. I've certainly had these arguments with people on the left, for that everything that happens is Russia or China, they're innocent babies and they're just reacting to what the U.S. does. We're the prime mover and aggressor. I'm like, well, we're only doing the things we do because of these. You can go back and forth. This is true of Israel, Palestine. Well, Israel did a lot of bad things, but that was in response to bad things the Palestinians did, which were responsive. You can go back thousands of years and do this blame game, and it's not helpful. And I just want the conflict and the violence to end. But I should also disclose for people watching. I know Tulsi a little bit better than your average member of Congress. I've met her at events. I've talked to her for a long period of time, so I'm friendly with her. So I might be more positively disposed to her than I ought to be for that reason. So
you can bring
putting that disclosure out there.
Bring her on, and we'll have a discussion about whether she is in fact too close to Mr. Putin or not.
Indeed, we would love to have her on, and we would love to continue talking about all of these exciting Trump picks. Are you entertained yet? I know I am. More Rising coming up next. Here's a major news update. Peanut the squirrel died for nothing. Peanut, who was seized from his home and euthanized 2 weeks ago, perhaps by agents of the deep state. I'm just asking questions. He did not have rabies, according to the recent reports. Now, at a news conference on Tuesday, public officials in New York made the announcement that the Instagram famous squirrel tested negative for the disease.
The squirrel was taken cruelly from his home in New York, along with the family's raccoon, Fred, who doesn't seem to be getting quite so much attention, following complaints about wildlife being kept without the necessary permits. The animals were considered pets by their owners, Mark and Daniela Longo. Fred, poor Fred, was also euthanized, and he too was innocent because he later tested negative for rabies. Peanut quickly became a symbol for some government kind of overreach and a fighting force in Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's presidential campaign. Not sure that that would have decided the fate of the election, but there was certainly some power to Peanut.
Peanut's owner was on News Nation with Chris Cuomo recently. Here's a little bit of that interview.
I haven't a clue, and it's still in the dark. I've gotten no answers. I've gotten no response to the government. I have to live in this state. And these people don't even have the stones to give me a call to say, hey, I killed your animals. Also, I cut their heads off. Also, Peanut doesn't have rabies, like we all knew in the beginning of this story. I'm still standing here without rabies from either one of those animals.
Are you considering legal action to make them have to disclose why this was done this way?
Absolutely. We are filing a very big lawsuit. We're going to get answers and we're going to demand them. Not only did you violate my constitutional rights, but you need to come up with an explanation as to why you murdered these animals.
Justice for peanuts is still something we need, Niall, my friend. It's just awful what has taken place. And innocent, did not have rabies. This is a pet. They came in and they killed his pet.
Well, I mean, I think...
Terrible.
Sorry, I was just getting some chat from our friends in the control room there, which was distracting me from Peanut's fate. Yeah, look, I mean, this is one of these things that has become a kind of cause celeb on the right. I'm not quite sure what I mean, look, I'm sorry for the squirrel, and I'm sorry that Fred isn't getting the attention he, I think, so richly deserves.
I saw
some anti-raccoon bias.
I saw a great, have you seen any of those, the time travel memes? Like, women with a time machine. Oh, hi, I'm your grandmother. Oh, so nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Men with a time machine, handing the raccoon a machine gun and go find Peanut. Run. They're coming.
I mean, I struggle to find that much to say. I mean, do you think this is genuinely like overreach?
Yes, I do think it's government overreach. I don't think the government should, without any inciting incident, if the squirrel had bitten a neighbor or something, then okay.
Yeah.
But I don't think the government needs to come into your home and kill your pet. Would I have a pet squirrel or pet raccoon? Sure. No. I like animals. I like wildlife. I don't like raccoons or squirrels particularly much. In fact, one of the formative experiences, which I think I've explained in great trauma-ridden detail on this show, was when in college I was running through the park and a squirrel ran up my leg, ran up and jumped off, and I still can feel it sometimes.
That's kind of...
I don't want a squirrel on me. Unlike this guy, Mark Longo, I don't want a squirrel on me, but to each their own.
Well,
I'm a libertarian.
Perhaps government could have intervened and saved you from an...
He's looking at me. He wants to climb up me, I know it.
You've been haunted by PTSD
yes.
of a squirrel nature here.
Yeah, so this is very much triggering to me. Yes, my PTSD,
yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is a microaggression. This is an unsafe working environment that I will be taking up to the highest levels of this corporation that I've had a squirrel looming over my shoulder.
Well, perhaps we need more safe spaces for you that are squirrel-free zones.
Just wrong.
But no, I don't really fully understand why they did this when the squirrel and the raccoon ultimately tested negative, I guess, for rabies. That seems peculiar. Now, I do think that the government has a legitimate interest in making sure that there are not disease-ridden animals running around the place, whether it be private homes or elsewhere. But the details of Peanut have escaped me, I have to say.
Look, I certainly agree with that, that they should not allow disease-ridden animals everywhere, but these animals were free from disease. They were not bothering anyone else. They were just on their property, in their own home. You know, I would never have these animals as pets, but other people are different, and the government should just not intervene unless there is a dispute to resolve. Do you know what I mean? Is that fair? Or if the government says you absolutely can't, I mean, I still am against this, but let's say, why do they have to kill the animals? And they say it's absolutely not acceptable to have a raccoon and a squirrel as house pets, and they'd be like, put in the zoo or the release of the wild. They have to be killed. They have to be euthanized.
So here's one of the difficulties I have with the whole peanut story, and I can't believe we're discussing this even semi-seriously, but the issue is, like, there are so many things that are more important to talk about, or bigger ills or issues in this country. And to me, these stories, I mean, I get all the theoretical arguments about government overreach and all of that. It does often seem a little bread and circuses to me, in a way that just distracts from all the other big, massive issues.
I mean, do I think it's a national issue? No, but people do run up against what wildlife you're allowed to. Like, I know people, I believe, who live in New York who want to keep chickens and grow eggs. My brother, he doesn't live in New York, he lives in Michigan, but he lives in the suburbs of west side of the state of Michigan, and him and his wife have chickens, and they get eggs that way, and my little nieces, get to learn about animals and how that all works, and it's good and cool. And in New York, there's restrictions, or there were at least, they might have been relaxed, on whether you can have chickens and that kind of thing. So there is government overreach that annoys people, and what you can do on your own property. It's pretty basic libertarian stuff, but I don't want them to get intervened unless it's absolutely has to be.
No, there are issues like that. I mean, last week I was speaking with our friend Amber Duke about the situation where the Amish in Pennsylvania had purportedly voted for Trump in disproportionate numbers because they felt there had been this unfair crackdown on certain things like the production of raw milk, for example, around which there are health standards. Now, as you know, I am less suspicious of the reach of government than you are, and I think that there are lots of topics from, poverty to illiteracy, to corporate greed, where it's actually government underreach is the problem rather than government overreach. But those are all bigger, different issues to the fate of Peanut this week.
There is no doubt that Peanut became so famous just because of the memeing and stuff on social media. And, is not connected really in any way to some agenda of Kamala Harris. But again, Democrats need to shed their unpopular associations, including with the people who want to come euthanize your pets. That actually does it for us today on Rising. Thank you for listening to this important update on the fate of Peanut. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you later.